Hi, Troublemaker Cosplay here, or Serena Jade. This is a video tutorial on how I created my Loki Lolita. Well, there's so many. I did not realize how many videos or how long this costume actually took me to make until I was going through the footage. So I hope you enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun for me to do. I did not film the initial sewing together of the pattern, just simply because it did not occur to me until much, like halfway through sewing it together that I should actually film this. The design that I'm working off of is a artwork that was circulating around the internet a while back, and I really loved it, and one of my friends wanted to do a group with me. So it has this cold shoulder effect where there's nothing on top of my shoulder. So basically what I did was put the pattern onto my dress form and trace out how I wanted the collar to be. Then what I did was I took it in and then fitted it to my body, sewed it, and ripped it apart. So the thing that you got to remember about taking in a pattern is that you have to replace that seam allowance. Otherwise, when you sew it back together, it's going to come out tighter than what you initially had wanted. That was a lesson learned hard with vinyl, personally. I was sitting there thinking about how to add in the perfect seam allowance. I remembered a tutorial that I had seen on Facebook a while back where somebody had taken 2 pencils and put rubber bands at the top and the bottom of it, and I tested it out after tracing my pattern out and then just tracing along the edges of said pattern, and it actually worked really well. It replaced the seam allowance that I had taken away by taking in the pattern. So the material that I'm using right now is a material called muslin, and I think all told that I spent on it was about $70, but I bought a bolt on it. I waited until Joann's had like a really good coupon. I think it was like 30% off, and then I just went in and I bought an entire bolt, and it was the best decision that I had ever made because it takes off a lot of anxiety for me, at least, just because I always am fearful that I'm going to screw it up. And I don't like having that hanging over my head. So having that bolt of muslin right next to me, it calms me down. So for me, the $70 was a good investment. One other thing that you should keep in mind if you're like me and you get turned around kind of easily when it comes to patterns, because I get so in the thick of it, is to mark out which patterns pieces are which. So front, I always put like front side, back side on my pieces, so that way I know which ones that I'm working with and I don't have to spend extra time figuring it out later on. So what I'm doing here now is just taking the pattern pieces after I had added in the seam allowance and putting them back onto the muslin and basically tracing them out. And another thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to trace out the entire pattern. You only have to realistically trace out one side of the pattern, because you're just creating extra work for yourself, because what you can do is fold your fabric and place the pattern piece on top of it, and then you have 2 new pieces of pattern, 2 new pattern pieces. So it's just a little trick to keep in mind. You're going to see a lot of like AMVs in the background of my videos, just simply because it gets really boring, and I guess that's the way I de-stress whenever I'm sewing. I get asked quite a bit how I can sit there and like hand embroider or put, like 600 zipper stoppers onto a costume, and it's always kind of like, I never really think about it until I look at it and I'm like, we just spent a lot of time doing that. How did we do that? Oh yeah, that's right. We make goofy faces when no one can see us just because we're just, I want to say unique, but at reality and at heart, we're odd. But yeah, I usually listen to music quite a bit whenever I'm sewing. It's just, I guess, like I said, it's the way I de-stress. It's cathartic for me. So another thing that you want to keep in mind is when you're working on a pattern, if there's any creases in it, you want to iron it out. So that way the creases don't mess up the next pattern, because if you're missing some of it, then if you're missing some of the pattern itself, then you're going to have a pattern that's off. Again, that's something that I learned personally because I didn't iron out a wrinkle before, and there was like a gigantic little triangle sticking out of my pattern piece, and I tried as hard as I tried, to fix it. It was gone, and I had to go through and scrap it. Another thing you can do to get the perfect seam allowance is take a seam gauge, the ruler that I'm using, and it has a little bar that you can move up and down. Usually, sometimes what I'll do instead of the pencil thing is take that ruler and go ahead and trace, measure out the seam allowance and do that. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.